Okay, let's dive straight into the material you shared with us about this legal drama unfolding right now in Los Angeles. It feels like a huge one.
Oh, absolutely.
Picture this. You've got this clash of absolute titans, Hollywood's biggest players going head to head with a really cutting edge AI company.
Mhm.
It's all happening in a federal court, and things really kicked off in a significant way very recently, actually, June 11th, 2025.
That's right. And what your sources really lay out is this fundamental conflict. On one side, you have the powerhouse studios, Disney and Universal, huge names.
Right.
And then squarely on the other side, you've got the AI company Midjourney. And this isn't just some, theoretical debate about tech
I
anymore.
know.
It's a very real high-stakes fight. It's all about intellectual property, copyright, really, in this new age of generative AI. And it's playing out right now in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California.
Exactly. So, our mission in this deep dive, looking at the material you brought, is to understand what's genuinely going on here. What are the core arguments? What's really at stake? Not just for creativity and tech globally, but potentially even for you, the listener, depending on how this all shakes out. Let's really try and unpack this whole situation.
Okay, so the core conflict, at the heart of it, the material really points to this deep-seated frustration from the studios. You have to think about it from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
They invest billions, literally billions, creating these iconic characters, these worlds. Darth Vader with his lightsaber, the Minions, Elsa, Yoda, Shrek, Spider-Man, Homer Simpson, Buzz Lightyear, Toothless the Dragon. I mean, the list goes on.
Instantly recognizable.
Instantly recognizable. Now, imagine seeing images of these figures just popping up online everywhere, and allegedly, they're generated by an AI platform without any permission, certainly without any payment going back to the creators.
It's got to feel like someone's just taken your life's work, copied it, and is now letting anyone remix it and spread it around for free.
Precisely.
So the main claim that Disney and Universal are making, according to your sources, it's quite specific, isn't it?
Very specific. They allege that Midjourney trained its AI, which is, incredibly powerful on vast libraries of their copyrighted works.
Vast libraries.
Huge amounts of data. And this material, they argue, was simply scraped from the internet, just hoovered up on a massive scale.
Right.
And the result, well, the platform then allows its users to generate countless unauthorized copies, derivative works featuring these exact characters. The language they use in the legal filing, it's incredibly strong. Your sources mentioned they called it a bottomless pit of plagiarism.
Wow.
And they labeled Midjourney a quintessential copyright free rider, really pulling no punches.
Free rider, that's
Yeah.
strong. And this isn't just a short complaint either, right? The lawsuit itself, filed in that California federal court, you mentioned it's described as, what, 110 pages?
Yeah, an extensive 110-page document. It meticulously outlines all these claims. It basically argues that Midjourney is building its entire business, profiting directly off their creative output, without respecting the fundamental rights that, underpin the whole creative industry.
Okay, so before we dig deeper into the legal fight itself, maybe let's get a clearer picture of Midjourney based on the material, founded in 2021 by David Holtz.
That's right.
Your sources mention he has quite an interesting background time at NASA, co-founded Leap Motion, that motion sensing tech company.
Yeah, quite the tech pedigree. And Midjourney quickly became a pretty significant player, didn't it? By September 2024, your sources say it had something like 21 million users. That's a huge user base in the text-to-image AI space.
21 million, that's substantial. And the tech itself, from the user side, seems pretty straightforward. You type in a text prompt, Iron Man fighting a medieval dragon in a foggy forest or something like that.
Right.
And boom, the AI spits out a unique image based on that description really quickly. It sounds pretty amazing, doesn't it?
It does sound powerful, and maybe even a bit like magic, but that's exactly the point the studios are jumping on. They argue, based on the material, that this speed, this versatility, this ability to seemingly create anything you ask for, well, it comes directly from allegedly using their copyrighted works during the AI's training process.
Okay, so the magic isn't magic, it's just data.
That's their argument. And here's where a really, really key piece of the puzzle seems to emerge from your sources. An admission, apparently, from David Holtz himself,
The founder.
the founder. In a 2022 interview, He reportedly stated quite plainly that the company's database, the huge collection of images used to train the AI, it came from a big scrape of the internet.
A big scrape. Okay.
And crucially, he apparently added there was no registry or metadata attached to this data. Basically, no labels saying where these images came from or who owned them.
No registry, no metadata. Wow. That admission, you combine that with the kind of output the AI is producing. Well, you can see how the studios are framing this whole conflict.
Absolutely.
For them, this isn't some kind of, human-like creative learning process. They see it much more bluntly, like someone making illegal photocopies of an entire library's worth of books, and then setting up a shop to sell access to those copies. The material describes their view of the platform as a kind of virtual vending machine.
Yeah, that's the phrase they used.
A vending machine specifically designed, in their view, for stealing intellectual property. And the lawsuit even includes, side-by-side comparisons?
Explicitly. Side-by-side comparisons trying to show the court just how similar Midjourney's generated images are to the original highly recognizable characters that Disney and Universal own, making it very visual.
Okay, this is fascinating. And what's really interesting in the material you shared is how it places this lawsuit in a much bigger picture. This isn't just some random isolated incident, is it?
Not at all. It's presented as a clear symptom, maybe even a boiling point, of this growing tension that's been simmering in Hollywood for a while now regarding AI, its potential, its disruption, the ethical questions.
Right.
And when you look at the scale of the industry, you can see why they're so concerned. The U.S. film and TV industry is just massive. Your sources note it supports, 2.3 million jobs? 2.3
million jobs, yeah.
It generates billions every year. We're talking $229 billion in wages, over $260 billion for the wider economy. It's huge.
And the foundation of all that value.
Exactly. The fundamental value, the engine driving all that economic activity, it's tied directly to their intellectual property. The characters, the stories, the music, the visuals, things they spend years, decades, huge amounts of money creating.
And we saw this anxiety surface really publicly, didn't we, during the 2023 writers and actors strike?
Oh, absolutely. That was a major flashpoint.
The use of AI, how it might displace human creatives, the need for protection against unauthorized digital doubles, those were huge sticking points for the unions.
Major non-negotiable concerns.
It feels like now the companies that actually own the IP are facing their own version of that same anxiety. Maybe from a different angle, the uncontrolled use of their creations to train the very tools that could potentially enable that displacement down the line.
That's a critical connection, I think. It really underscores how these issues are all tangled together within the industry.
Okay.
But it's also important to note, as your material points out, that Disney and Universal aren't necessarily framing this as being totally anti-AI.
Okay, so they're not Luddites about it.
Not entirely, no. They seem to acknowledge the potential of AI tools for, say, enhancing creative workflows or finding production efficiencies. But, as one executive was quoted saying, drawing a very clear line, piracy is piracy.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. Doesn't matter if the tool's a torrent site or a sophisticated generative AI model. If it's enabling unauthorized copying, it's piracy in their eyes.
And this lawsuit, it wasn't their first move, according to the material. They tried other things first.
Right. They contend they didn't just leap straight into court. Disney apparently sent a cease and desist letter to Midjourney sometime in 2024. Basically, stop infringing our stuff.
Okay.
Universal followed up with their own cease and desist in early 2025. But the response from Midjourney, according to the sources, was reportedly minimal, maybe even silence.
Well, they kept developing the AI.
Exactly. And the studios make this point. Midjourney does have the tech to block other kinds of content, right? Like graphic violence or nudity. They can filter that stuff out. But in the studio's view, they haven't applied that same filtering tech effectively, or maybe at all, to stop the generation of their copyrighted characters. Which suggests to the studios either an unwillingness or just not enough effort.
Which obviously raises the stakes quite a bit. And the material makes it clear this is about way more than just money, right? Although the money involved must be potentially enormous.
Oh, the financial side is undoubtedly huge. But the studio's core argument, as presented in your sources, goes deeper. They argue that Midjourney's alleged actions fundamentally threaten the bedrock incentives of U.S. copyright law.
Okay, let's unpack that. Bedrock incentives. What does that mean practically?
Well, think about why copyright law exists in the first place. It grants creators exclusive rights control over how their work is used, copied, distributed, adapted.
Right, so they can profit from it.
Exactly. That control is meant to provide the economic incentive for people and companies to invest the time, the talent, the, frankly, huge amounts of capital needed to create original works, movies, books, music, software.
So if anyone can just freely copy and use that IP?
Scrape it, use it to generate infinite new versions without consequence or compensation. The studios are basically asking, why would anyone bother making the massive investment needed to create the next Star Wars, or the next Minions, or the next big thing? It potentially undermines the whole system.
It's a powerful argument about the foundation of copyright itself. Although, you look at the players involved, the material really highlights the massive financial power imbalance here.
It's hard to ignore.
Disney, Universal, these are global giants. Disney's revenue last year, mentioned in the material, was $91 billion.
A 91 billion.
This isn't David versus Goliath. It's more like two Goliaths versus a rapidly growing, but still much smaller David. Your sources even had that incredibly blunt quote from a law professor.
Oh, I remember that one.
Something like, it's Disney, so Midjourney are fricked. Pardon the language.
Yeah, pretty direct.
And while that's crude, it does sort of highlight the perceived odds, doesn't it? Going up against adversaries with that kind of legal firepower and the deep pockets to sustain litigation for years if necessary.
It definitely paints a picture of an uphill battle. But despite that perceived imbalance, Midjourney isn't just rolling over. David Holtz, the founder, reportedly sounded quite confident as recently as June 11th.
What did he say?
He stated his belief that Midjourney will be around for a very long time. And he's previously offered a defense that tries to frame the AI's learning process as similar to how a human artist learns.
It's a human artist analogy.
Right. His argument, as it's presented, is basically asking, look, if a person learns by looking at countless pictures, including copyrighted ones, and then uses that visual knowledge, that inspiration, to create their own art, is that wrong? He seems to be suggesting the AI is doing something similar, just on a massive scale, learning from a huge visual data set.
That analogy, it sounds kind of intuitively reasonable at first, doesn't it? We all learn by seeing, by being inspired by what came before.
It has a certain appeal.
But your sources in the studios, they push back hard on that comparison. And this is where the legal details, the nuances become really critical.
Absolutely critical.
They argue that generating near-identical copies of characters as specific, as instantly recognizable as Darth Vader or Shrek or Spider-Man, that's just not the same as a human artist being inspired and creating something new. This often comes down to that legal concept of fair use, right?
Exactly. Fair use is the big one here. It's a key defense in copyright law. It allows limited use of copyrighted material without permission for certain purposes, like criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, research.
Things that add something new.
Right. And a crucial factor courts look at is whether the new work is transformative. Does it add something new? Does it alter the original with new expression, new meaning, a new message, or is it just copying?
And the studios are arguing, based on those side-by-side examples they include in the lawsuit, that spitting out an image of Darth Vader that just looks like, well, Darth Vader, that's not transformative.
Not in their view, no.
Yeah. They see it as just a derivative copy, something that lets users bypass the need to actually license the character or create their own distinct version. It's a direct substitute for their work, not something fundamentally new built upon it.
And this specific lawsuit, it's really significant because, as your material shows, it's not happening in isolation. It's not a one-off.
Right. It's part of a bigger trend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This legal challenge is part of a much broader wave of similar battles that are sweeping across the creative world, the tech world. Other big AI companies, Stability AI with Stable Diffusion, OpenAI with DALL-E, they're also facing lawsuits.
Also.
All sorts of groups, visual artists, authors, poets, even major news organizations. And they're all alleging pretty much the same thing, that their copyrighted work was used without permission, without compensation, to train these powerful AI models.
Yeah, we've definitely seen those related cases popping up. The material mentioned that back in 2023, a judge in California actually allowed a class action suit by artists against Midjourney and Stability AI to proceed, right? Finding their claims of copying were plausible.
That's right. That case is ongoing. And internationally, too, Getty Images, the huge stock photo company, is suing Stability AI in London over similar claims about using millions of their photos for training.
So it really feels like creative industries everywhere are wrestling with these exact same fundamental questions: ownership, permission, value in this new AI era.
They absolutely are. It highlights how this legal uncertainty is a global issue now. AI companies often lean heavily on that fair use defense we talked about.
Right. The argument being that training on publicly available data is fair use, maybe like a search engine indexing the web.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But as your sources make very clear, this is a highly debated, legally complex gray area. The courts are still actively trying to figure this out to define the boundaries. There's no slam dunk precedent specifically for using copyrighted works to train generative AI on this kind of massive scale.
And this is where some of the legal experts quoted in your material suggest the Disney Universal case might actually have a potentially stronger angle, or at least a different one.
Oh, so?
Well, instead of focusing only on proving that specific copyrighted images were copied into the training data itself, which can be technically really hard to demonstrate, looking inside the AI's black box,
Right. That's
the,
true.
the studios are putting a very strong emphasis on Midjourney's output. They're pointing
Yeah.
directly at those generated images that are clearly, undeniably ripping off their characters. The argument becomes less about the how and more about the what.
Focus on the result, not just the process.
Exactly. The argument is, regardless of exactly how the AI learned to do it, the result is infringement. Look at this picture of Not Quite Mickey that the AI generated.
That focus on the output definitely makes their case maybe more visually compelling for a judge or jury. It could be easier to argue in court. It's harder to claim that spitting out a near-perfect copy of Buzz Lightyear or Homer Simpson is somehow transformative, fair use that creates something genuinely new.
Yeah, it shifts the focus from the complex AI training process to the much more tangible, potentially infringing results that users are getting.
Which leads us to another interesting layer explored in the material. The motivation behind the lawsuit. Is this purely about protecting intellectual property rights, which is obviously crucial for them? Or is there maybe a more strategic element, even a kind of power play, happening here?
That's a really interesting question. What do the sources suggest?
Well, while the IP protection concerns are undoubtedly genuine, it's their core business model. Some experts quoted in your material speculate that this could also be a very deliberate strategic move.
Strategic in what way?
One possibility floated is that this lawsuit is designed, at least partly, to force companies like Midjourney to the negotiating table.
To force licensing deals.
Potentially, to make them agree to pay for using creative works as AI training data.
Right.
The material does mention there's already this sort of emerging market forming around licensing content specifically for AI training.
Right. Companies trying to be the brokers for that.
Exactly. So maybe the studios, seeing where AI is heading, are positioning themselves not just to defend their existing IP, but maybe also to capitalize on this whole new potential market, licensing their massive libraries as raw material for AI development. Turn a threat into a revenue stream.
That's certainly a plausible strategic angle. Defend the castle walls, but also set up a toll booth outside.
That's one way to put it. But regardless of the specific licensing goals, the lawsuit itself sends a very clear, very loud warning shot across the bow of the entire generative AI industry.
No doubt about that.
Hollywood, which maybe some felt was a bit slower to react legally compared to, say, the music or photo industries, is now signaling very clearly.
Right.
We're watching, and we will not tolerate the free, unauthorized use of our extremely valuable IP. This is the entertainment industry flexing its considerable legal and financial muscle.
So let's pull this all together then. Where does this leave us right now, based on the material you've shared?
The lawsuit's just getting started, really. Kicked off June 11th.
Very early days. Disney and Universal, they're seeking serious outcomes here. They want a jury trial. They want ordinary people to decide the facts. They're seeking potentially huge monetary damages. The material mentioned the statutory maximum.
Yeah, $150,000 per infringed work.
Which, if they can prove widespread infringement across many characters and instances, that could add up to an absolutely astronomical sum.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And crucially, they also want an injunction, a court order telling Midjourney to stop creating these allegedly infringing images in the future, stop the output.
So you've got this contrast. Midjourney's founder expressing confidence, arguing the AI learns like a human.
Right.
And on the other side, these two media behemoths, armed with a massive legal complaint, visual evidence, and arguing fundamental copyright principles are at stake.
It's a classic setup for a major legal battle. And the potential impact, whoever ultimately wins, is truly massive. It goes way beyond just these companies.
How so?
Well, if the studios win, especially if they win based on that output argument we discussed, it could force huge changes across the whole AI landscape.
Like what?
It could mandate big shifts in how AI models are trained. Maybe force more robust filtering of copyrighted stuff, or perhaps more likely, really accelerate the push towards formal licensing systems for training data, pay to play.
Make AI companies much more careful about what their tools can actually generate.
Extremely careful, especially regarding recognizable characters, styles, anything that looks like existing IP. But conversely,
What if Midjourney wins?
if Midjourney successfully defends against these claims, particularly if their fair use argument
Right.
about training data or that human-artist analogy gains legal traction,
Yeah.
well, that could embolden much more widespread web scraping. It could encourage the use of copyrighted material by AI developers without needing licenses.
Setting a very different precedent.
A very different one. It might shift the burden of dealing with infringement more onto the creators or the end users of the AI rather than the developers who built the tool.
Wow. So what this material really reveals is that this specific case, Disney and Universal versus Midjourney, it has the potential to set a truly significant, maybe even global precedent.
It really feels that way. It sits right at this complex intersection of cutting-edge tech, creative industries built on IP, and these evolving legal interpretations.
Yeah.
The outcome could genuinely shape the future of AI, creativity, and copyright law for years, maybe even decades.
It really does give you pause, makes you think. In a world where AI can instantly conjure up images that look so much like beloved characters, characters that took teams years and fortunes to create and popularize, how do we find the right balance?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
How do you weigh the incredible potential of this technology against the fundamental rights of the creators who made the original stuff? What happens to the incentive, that core reason to create new stories, new characters, new art, if copying becomes too easy, too accurate, or essentially costs nothing? This legal fight, it feels like it's not just about cartoon character or sci-fi icons anymore. Based on everything in the material you shared, it feels like it's about the very future of creative work itself and who ultimately gets to benefit from it.